Have you ever sent a message you immediately wished you could pull back? The kind that makes your chest tighten before the screen even goes dark? For Daniel Harper, that moment arrived at 11:47 p.m., when 3 words meant for the past slipped into the present and landed in the wrong hands, changing everything he thought he understood about grief, timing, and second chances. The message was simple, painfully honest, and never meant to be read by anyone alive. I still need you. Daniel stared at the glowing screen, frozen, as a realization crashed into him like cold water. He hadn't sent it to his late wife's old number like he did on nights when the silence felt unbearable. He had sent it to his supervisor. His phone vibrated once. Then again. Daniel dropped it onto the couch, as if it had burned him, and ran a hand through his hair, heart pounding. At 37, he had mastered deadlines, single parenting, and exhaustion. But he had not mastered loneliness, especially the kind that crept in after his daughter finally fell asleep. 2 years earlier, his wife Hannah had died suddenly, leaving behind a quiet house and an 80-year-old girl named Sophie, who still asked questions. Daniel didn't know how to answer. Nights were the hardest. That was when Daniel sometimes typed messages to Hannah's old number, never expecting a reply, just needing the illusion that she was still somewhere close. But tonight, grief had made his fingers careless. Instead of Hannah's name, he had clicked the most recent conversation on his phone. His boss, Evelyn Carter, calm, brilliant, impossibly composed. The last person who should ever receive something so raw. A notification appeared. Typing bubbles. Daniel's stomach dropped. He shut his eyes, already rehearsing apologies, explanations, excuses that wouldn't sound unhinged. Evelyn Carter was known for professionalism, not emotional ambiguity, and certainly not late-night confessions from employees. When he finally forced himself to look, the reply was short. "Daniel, are you okay?" A pause followed. Then another message arrived. That message sounded like pain. "I'm concerned." He exhaled slowly, shame rising to his face. There was no undoing it now. He typed back carefully, explaining it was a mistake, that the message wasn't meant for her, that he was sorry and would see her Monday. He hovered over the send button before adding the truth, because lying felt worse. "My wife passed away. Sometimes I still text her number." Tonight was hard. He sent it, bracing himself for silence or discomfort. Several seconds passed. Then her reply came. "You don't owe me an apology. Please take care of yourself." Nothing more. No awkwardness. No questions. Daniel leaned back, relief washing through him, convinced the moment would dissolve into memory by morning. Saturday arrived quietly, the way grief-filled weekends often did. Sophie sat at the kitchen table surrounded by cardboard, markers, and glue, frowning at a half-built school project. Daniel tried to help, but patience was thin on both sides. By mid-morning, a knock echoed through the apartment. Daniel opened the door and froze. Evelyn Carter stood in the hallway, not in her tailored blazers, but in jeans and a soft sweater, holding 2 coffees and a small paper bag. She looked just as startled to see him as he felt seeing her. "I hope this isn't inappropriate," she said gently. "I was nearby. I thought maybe today shouldn't be faced alone." Before Daniel could respond, Sophie peeked around the corner, curiosity lighting her tired eyes. "Are you from Daddy's work?" "Se asked." Evelyn smiled, kneeling to her level without hesitation, introducing herself like a neighbor, not a boss. Something in Daniel's chest shifted. This wasn't pity. This wasn't obligation. It was presence. And as Evelyn stepped inside, the quiet apartment felt different, like air had finally begun to move again. Daniel didn't yet understand it, but that single mistake, that one misplaced message, had just opened a door he'd been afraid to knock on for years. Evelyn didn't take control of the room the way she did in meetings. Instead, she followed Sophie's lead, asking questions about planets and glitter glue, letting the child explain things with the seriousness only children possess. Daniel watched from the kitchen doorway, struck by how easily Evelyn softened, how different she felt outside the walls of work. The project became a shared mission. Paint spilled, laughter replaced frustration. Sophie corrected Evelyn with confidence, and Evelyn accepted it with a smile, never rushing, never checking her phone. Daniel realized how long it had been since he'd seen his daughter this relaxed. This scene, without the shadow of loss hovering over every moment. As the cardboard planets dried, they moved to the kitchen table for lunch. Conversation drifted naturally, touching on school stories, favorite foods, and small everyday details that usually felt heavy, but today felt lighter. Sophie spoke openly about missing her mother, and Daniel braced himself, ready to redirect, but Evelyn didn't interrupt or flinch. "My mom died when I was young," Evelyn said quietly, surprising them both. "It was just my father and me after that." Sophie looked at her with wide eyes, recognizing something familiar. The room grew still, not with sadness, but with understanding. Later, Sophie tugged Daniel aside and whispered, "She understands, Daddy." The words landed harder than he expected. He nodded, unsure how to respond, realizing children often saw truths adults tried to ignore. In the afternoon, they went to the park, something Daniel usually avoided because it reminded him of the life they'd lost. Today felt different. Evelyn pushed Sophie on the swings, laughed without restraint, and encouraged messy joy. Daniel sat on a bench, watching something he hadn't seen in a long time unfold in front of him. He noticed how Evelyn didn't try to replace anyone. She didn't overstep, she simply showed up, fully present, letting moments be what they were. The warmth in his chest felt unfamiliar and terrifying, like hope knocking softly instead of demanding entry. As the sun dipped low, they walked home together. Sophie skipped ahead, exhausted and happy, while Daniel and Evelyn walked in quiet sync. He thanked her, stumbling over the words, unsure how to articulate what the day had meant. Evelyn paused before responding. "When I read your message last night," she said carefully, "I recognized the loneliness. I know what it feels like to miss someone so deeply it aches in your bones. I didn't want that moment to end in embarrassment. I wanted it to lead somewhere kinder." Daniel looked at her differently then. Not as his boss, not as a symbol of stability, but as someone who carried her own invisible weight with grace. He realized how often he assumed strength meant isolation. Before leaving, Evelyn handed him a small card. On the back was her personal number. "For the right messages," she said softly, not smiling, but sincere. Daniel nodded, throat tight, understanding the trust in that gesture. That night, after Sophie fell asleep clutching her stuffed rabbit, Daniel sat alone on the couch. The apartment, quieter than usual, but not empty. He stared at the card for a long time before finally picking up his phone. "Thank you for today," he typed. Sophie hasn't stopped smiling. "I haven't either." He hesitated, then sent it before fear could interfere. The reply came quickly. "I'm glad I came." Daniel leaned back, exhaling slowly, feeling something loosen inside him. The grief was still there, but it no longer felt like the only thing in the room. Over the following weeks, Evelyn became a gentle constant. Sunday dinners, homework help, shared silences that didn't need fixing. At work, professionalism remained intact, but something unspoken passed between them in quiet glances and mutual respect. Daniel noticed Sophie laughing more, asking fewer questions that ended in tears. He noticed himself sleeping better, breathing easier, daring to imagine a future that didn't erase the past but honored it. Still, fear lingered. Love after loss felt like betrayal. Moving forward felt like forgetting. Daniel carried those thoughts silently, unsure how to name them, until one evening, sitting across from Evelyn at a small cafe, he finally spoke them aloud. Evelyn listened without interruption, then reached across the table and took his hand. "Love doesn't replace," she said gently. "It expands." The words settled deep, reshaping something he had believed was permanently broken. Daniel didn't know where this path would lead, but for the first time in years, he wasn't afraid to take the next step. And it all traced back to a single message sent to the wrong person at exactly the right time. Time did what it always does when people allow it to. It softened sharp edges without erasing the scars. Weeks turned into months, and what began as shared moments slowly became shared lives. Evelyn didn't arrive with grand gestures or promises. She arrived consistently, showing Sophie how to bake cookies, attending school events quietly, and sitting beside Daniel on evenings when memories felt too heavy to carry alone. At work, nothing changed on paper. Titles stayed the same. Boundaries remained respected, but beneath the professionalism grew a trust built not on attraction alone, but on understanding. Daniel noticed how Evelyn never pushed him forward. She waited, letting him choose when to step closer, when to pause, when to breathe. One evening, after Sophie had fallen asleep mid-story, Daniel finally invited Evelyn to stay for dinner. Just the two of them? No distractions. No roles. Over simple food and honest conversation, they spoke about grief in ways neither had before. About guilt, about fear, about the strange feeling of loving again without wanting to erase the past. Daniel admitted what haunted him most, that moving forward meant leaving something behind. Evelyn answered without hesitation. "Love doesn't disappear," she said. "It changes shape. It makes room." The words didn't fix everything, but they loosened the knot around his heart. The first time they held hands, it wasn't dramatic. It happened during a walk home, fingers brushing, then staying. Daniel felt fear rise, then settle. Not because the fear vanished, but because it no longer controlled him. Evelyn squeezed his hand once, steady and reassuring. Sophie noticed before either of them acknowledged it. Children always do. One night, as Daniel tucked her in, she asked softly if Evelyn could stay forever. Daniel didn't answer immediately. He kissed her forehead and said, "We'll see." Sophie smiled, like that was enough. 6 months after the message that changed everything, Daniel planned something small. He took Evelyn back to the park, where laughter had first returned to his life. As the sun dipped low and the playground emptied, he spoke words he hadn't practiced, afraid rehearsing them would strip them of truth. "I didn't think my heart had room anymore," he said. "But you didn't force your way in. You waited. You showed me that love after loss isn't betrayal. It's survival." Evelyn's eyes filled with tears before he reached into his pocket. Doreen Wasson tea. Extravagant. It didn't need to be. When he asked her to build a future with him and Sophie, Evelyn answered without drama or doubt. Yes. The word carried certainty, not urgency, and that made it powerful. Sophie found out moments later, dancing in circles when they returned home. She hugged Evelyn tightly and whispered, "I knew it." Daniel laughed, realizing how much trust his daughter had placed in a future he once feared. Life continued, imperfect and beautiful. Evelyn moved in slowly, respecting the memories that lived in every corner of the house. Nothing was erased. New moments simply grew around the old ones. Sophie helped decorate Evelyn's workspace, proudly declaring it part of their family now. On the anniversary of the night, everything began. Daniel sat on the couch holding Evelyn's hand, his phone resting between them. He scrolled back to that message, the one meant for someone who could no longer answer. It no longer hurt the way it once had. Evelyn leaned her head against his shoulder. "Some mistakes," she said softly, "aren't mistakes at all. They're invitations." Daniel nodded, understanding now that healing rarely arrives the way we expect. Their wedding was small, honest, filled with people who knew loss and still chose joy. Sophie walked proudly down the aisle, scattering petals with purpose. When Evelyn spoke her vows, she didn't promise perfection. She promised presence. Daniel promised the same. To love bravely, to remember without being trapped, to choose hope even when fear whispered otherwise. When they kissed, it wasn't the end of a story. It was a continuation. Later that night, as music faded and lights dimmed, Evelyn whispered with a smile that matched the one she'd worn the day she knocked on his door, "I'm glad you texted the wrong person." Daniel smiled back. "I don't think I did." Life, he knew now, wasn't about avoiding mistakes. It was about what we do when they happen. Sometimes a single message sent in grief becomes the beginning of healing. Sometimes the universe speaks softly, through accidents we almost apologize for. And sometimes love finds us not when we're ready, but when we're honest enough to admit we're not.